Hey everyone, I just wanted to thank you for listening to my presentation that is going over my research for my seminar paper. My paper is titled Lasting Impact, Women and the Home. In my paper, I take a look at women and power and agency within the home or the domestic sphere as is seen in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, Margaret Atwood's Lady Oracle, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic. My thesis for my paper states that for women, the home is a proxy for power that is granted or revoked by men, a haunting presence that leads to constraint, or a place of power and agency as seen in these works and to an extent today. As I am taking a look at how womanhood is portrayed and evolves through these Gothic works, it's important for me to start with the idea of the angel of the house. So this concept stems from the idea of having separate spheres, both the domestic and the public spheres, where the idea of power and agency is largely gendered, with women having power and agency within the home, while men had the power and agency outside the home. However, the caveat is that men would also retain their power within the home as they were seen as the head of the family and kind of as the overseer of the home, who dictated his power and authority to generally his wife. So this depiction of the angel of the house was used to teach young girls and young women how they were expected to act and move through the world, generally as a wife and a mother. And the idea of this holds four cardinal virtues that Barbara Walter describes in her article, The Cult of True Womanhood, in 1820 to 1860. So these virtues are piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. So these virtues are what women were generally judged on based off of how well they uphold these virtues and lead their household in the ways of piety and purity, and teach their young girls these virtues as well. So the becoming of the angel of the house was quite a feat, and it was a standard that was difficult to achieve. As such, the women in these narratives kind of offer a look at how women have worked to be the angel of the house, or kind of used these virtues to create kind of a facade to be able to hold position and authority within their home and by extension within their own lives. So with that, a little bit of background, I started looking at these narratives, starting with Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. So here we see that the women in the home, the governess and Mrs. Grose, are acting as proxies for power. Their power and authority within the home was granted to them by the children's uncle, and as such, their roles within the home are dictated based off of the position that he has placed each of these women in. That being said, when the governess comes into the home, her presence takes away some authority that was previously held by Mrs. Grose, and so that also shows some contention between women, or particularly on Mrs. Grose's end, as to the loss of authority and kind of her role as guiding Flora. This takes place because the governess, while being commissioned to teach both Flora and Miles, she kind of replaces Mrs. Grose in that role of the surrogate mother. So with being placed in these roles, the governess begins to uphold the virtues of womanhood outlined by Walter in terms of piety and purity. The governess sees her role as being the person to teach Miles and Flora as also the individual who is responsible for guiding them into purity and keeping them from any possible corruption. So this desire to protect the purity of the two children and the actions that she takes to preserve their purity are discussed by E. Duncan as well in their article Reflections of a Governess, Image and Distortion in the Turn of the Screw. In the article, they discuss that the apparitions of Quaint and Miss Jessel actually could possibly stem from the governess's own imagination in terms of her seeing the possibility or the beginnings of corruption in the children. And so as such, she takes it upon herself to rid them of corruption and prevent any possible future corruption that would damage their purity. And throughout the narrative, the governess begins to feel as if her authority and her position are being threatened with the children's change in behavior, as she is responsible for their behavior and could be removed if the uncle was displeased with how she was instructing or unable to instruct the children. So while she is placed in the role of governess and in turn as a somewhat of a surrogate mother, she is placed in that position to offer an example of the angel of the house. However, she does not have the security of marriage as she is working for the uncle rather than married to the uncle. So in terms of upholding true womanhood, she would fall short in that as she is not married. However, she does take on the role of mother. And as she takes on this role, she finds herself slipping in authority, which leads to her actions to protect the children that eventually lead to the tragic end with Miles's death. But by the end of the narrative, we can see that from an outside perspective, the uncle most likely seemed to view her actions as upholding the virtues of true womanhood, as she is able to work for another family. So it shows that sometimes women can be faced with strain in trying to achieve that ideal angel of the house status. Now the next section focuses on Margaret Atwood's Lady Oracle. In this section, Atwood paints a very vivid image on how a home can turn into this haunting presence in someone's life and how it affects them long after they've moved away from that immediate home, and in reality the relationship between mother and daughter, which is built and fostered in that home with Joan and Fran. As seen in the novel, Joan's mother always seems to circle back to the topic of Joan's weight and the societal standard of having a slim body seems to really plague Joan throughout the novel. This idea of society's standard of a slim body linked with Joan and her mother's relationship is discussed in Shuli Bizillard. In the article, Say That I Had a Lovely Face, the Grimm's Rapunzel, Tennyson's Lady Shallot, and Atwood's Lady Oracle, where they explained that the focus on Joan's weight is a result of the relationship to her mother, which motivates Joan's obsession with food. And this relationship with food and this focus on it is a representation of the mother's concerns of her own failings and inadequacies that she is then projecting onto her daughter. As Joan's mother sees Joan's relationship with food as a reflection of her actions as a mother, it is part of the reason why Joan has such a focus on food and why she has used that as kind of a coping mechanism in terms of how her mother is in almost constant disapproval of her. So the mother-daughter relationship is pivotal in how the home influences Joan's self-image and self-worth, which continues long into her adulthood, both in terms of her body image with body dysmorphia and as well as her relationship with men, as discussed by Frances Restuccia in Tales of Beauty Aestheticizing Female Melancholia, where she explains that Joan's relationships with men sustain the warped bond that she shares with her mother, because these relationships with men also cause her to be self-conscious, which is a reflection of growing up in a home that led her to internalize that struggle with her self-worth and her self-image. As we've seen with the background of the angel of the home, the mother really is the backbone of the home, and so having a strained relationship with her mother is what leads Joan into having these long-term issues and struggles with her self-image and her self-worth. In other words, the home is built on the mother-child relationship, for better or for worse, in the child's future. So as I moved on to Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, we start to see the evolution of womanhood from James's narrative and Atwood's narrative. So while Atwood's narrative shows the lasting impact of a neglectful home environment, Moreno Garcia's offers a updated look at the home being the center of women's power. So in the novel, we see that Naomi uses aspects of womanhood that were discussed by Walter, particularly the idea that Naomi's mother sees the goals for women to be marriage and motherhood, while Naomi herself wants to continue pursuing her education, already breaking that idea that womanhood is centered in the home. Additionally, another aspect of womanhood that Naomi uses is the idea of how to use a soft and or a gentle voice and being aware of how one's tone and wording is coming across. So this is seen when she is talking with Virgil about Catalina, and the novel states that Naomi was not sure how to address him. She must be more serious, temper her natural flirtiness, lest he think her silly. He had the stamp of authority here, but she also had authority. She was an envoy. So her experiences being a socialite have given her what womanhood sees as important, being able to cater to those that she is caring for and those that she is interacting with. However, Naomi uses this as a way to position herself within discussions and allow her to move within the domestic as well as the public spheres. Because while she is mostly within a home setting, she has goals of being in the world, and we do see that come up when she is discussing university with her father and she is interacting with individuals within the town. So these moments of Naomi pushing the boundaries of that traditional 19th century womanhood culminate in the end scene where they are escaping High Place. When they enter into the family crypt and they are escaping, Naomi throws the lamp towards Agnes's body that has merged with the fungus that is encompassing the house. And the flames create a halo effect, which in a way anoints Agnes as the angel of the house, because she completely portrayed the aspects of womanhood, as in she was being submissive and thriving in the domestic sphere because she became the domestic sphere. And Naomi's act to burn the fungus is her rejection of the ideal that womanhood is strictly to be confined to the home, and it allows her to rediscover her strength and move past the idea of separate spheres. The destruction of the home is the door opening between the private and public domains. So, as we move beyond the home and into how literature is incorporating these very separate spheres as a way to teach young women, if literature will continue to progress as society has, and that means using less separate sphere-centered language, which enables individuals of all gender identities to see themselves in narratives that place them as the protagonist. And it is important for the representation that women are not strictly confined to the home, and that individuals of all gender identities have the ability and the opportunity to be the center of the story. Overall, the idea of separate spheres has been fading, and it will continue to fade over time. And literature will continue to evolve with the ideas of womanhood and power and agency of all individuals, allowing for the discussions to widen over who is able to do these things and move in these spaces. And I think that Mexican Gothic is a really great indicator that literature is offering those opportunities of representation and visibility. And I look forward to seeing what continues to come out in the next few years and beyond. So thank you guys for listening to my presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful end of the semester, and thank you guys so much for everything. Thank you.